So here's something huge that most great artists don't talk about. They steal, whether it's The Searchers, turning into Star Wars, Ghost in the Shell, into The Matrix, Turner, to Monet, You Give Love a Bad Name, to Come Down. You'd be hard-pressed to find a great artist who doesn't steal. So just rip off your favorite bass lines and you'll be the next Jamerson or Flea, right? I wrote that. Well, hold your horses, because great artists steal, but they don't copy. You don't want to take John Deacon's brilliant Under Pressure and then vanilla ice the situation by claiming that this is a totally different bass line. So how do you steal like an artist and not copy like a hack? Well, once you know all 7 stealing methods in this video, instead of struggling to pull bassline ideas from thin air, you can easily turn any classic into your own cool shit. And stealing method number 1 is something I'm sure you've heard before. Can you detect what these riffs have in common?
Hey, hey, hey. What's up? These are the good times. Walks barely down the street with the brick pool way down low.
So what do these bass lines have in common? Obviously, it's those big, beefy starting notes. Now, that might seem too simple to call it stealing. I mean, it's just 3 frickin' notes, right? But we know Queen was in the studio with Chic while they were recording Good Times, and we know Nile Rodgers of Chic's cousin was in Kool and the Gang.
And when they wrote the song Hollywood Swingin', I
Swingin'.
was like, damn!
So Bites the Dust ripped Good Times the same way Good Times ripped Hollywood Swingin', by using method 1, steal half. Because we all know you shouldn't steal the whole thing, but if you artfully take half, you leave enough room to take the rest in another direction, so it feels inspired by rather than copied from. So you can see all 3 bass lines start with the same notes and rhythm, that big, fat, low E. But at the halfway point, they all go their own direction. And to help you hear them all line up at the beginning, here's all 3 songs played at once, aka Good Times Bites the Dust, Swingin'. And there are even more examples of this exact steal. Wolfpack's 3 on E, a direct tribute to these past bass lines. Gasoline by Måneskin. Not to mention Rapper's Delight, which was a full rip of Good Times.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat.
Stealing half works great for any art form. You could even look at Van Gogh's Starry Night as roughly using this method to borrow from Hokusai's Great Wave, which Van Gogh was known to admire. Mashed up, you can really see the overlap. These 7 methods are so powerful, at the end of the video, I'll show you how you can use them all on just 1 stolen bass line to come up with basically infinite cool ideas. But the steal half method is probably the easiest of the 7 to use, because you just slice a bass line you love in half, make up something else, and stick it on the end. Like, let's say you want a bass line in the style of Sunshine of Your Love. We can snip that first half and then just noodle around using the same blues scale and get automatic, cool bass ideas that don't sound too obviously like the source. But it gives you a starting inspiration that takes you out of the blank page, what the hell should I play zone. And there's an even sneakier way you can get away from that blank page. It's very unlikely anyone will catch how you stole if you use method 2. You wouldn't think a Green Day song would sound so much like Pink, but here we are, because the fellas used method 2, steal the rhythm, but change the notes. Now, you can't get away with stealing the rhythm and the notes, otherwise you get I'm Talking About You by Chuck Berry becoming I Saw Her Standing There by the Beatles, just 1-to-1, no changes. I mean, Paul McCartney did get away with it in that he never had to give Berry formal songwriting credit, and Paul's even said, I maintain that a bass riff hasn't got to be original. And also subscribe to Bassbook. And he's totally right, but if you use the methods in this video, your non-originality will be less detectable. And as the saying goes, what is originality? Undetected plagiarism. Originally attributed to William Ralph. Me. I made it up. Nah, not really, because stealing 100% and claiming it's yours is not cool. But grabbing a rhythm while changing the notes works amazingly, because you get a battle-tested feel that you know you like, but the actual sound could be completely unrecognizable. So if you look at both riffs, the notes are different, as indicated by the different lines and spaces on the staff, but the rhythms, the symbols that tell you when to play the notes, are identical. 1 and a 2, a 3, 4, 1 and a 2, a 3. As you can see, it's a lot easier to steal rhythms properly if you know how to count and read them, which is just the beginning of what you learn in my massive step-by-step Beginner to Badass course, where you learn all the basics of sheet music, the technique to pull off killer riffs like these, and get legit ready to jam with people. And before we get mad at Green Day for copying this riff, Pink's riff sounds an awful lot like Black Knight by Deep Purple. which is actually the same riff verbatim from We Ain't Got Nothing Yet by Blues Magoos, which is actually the riff from Summertime by Ricky Nelson. Stealing. But did Green Day intentionally think, oh, let's rip that Pink riff but change the notes? Possibly not. Sometimes you subconsciously rip something from the past, but it feels like your own, and sometimes it's just coincidence. But when you're stuck and you need help thinking of a bass line or improving something you came up with, that's the time to intentionally use these 7 methods to get the juices flowing. And this Steal the Rhythm method is pretty flippin' easy to use. You just take any rhythm you like, pick a scale or some random notes, and you can turn Express Yourself into this same rhythm, totally different feel. No lawsuits here, just good, healthy stealing. Now, method 3, on the other hand, you gotta tread carefully or you could have lawyers at your door. Okay, not trying to pick on Green Day here, it just kind of shook out that way. And I hope it's clear that pointing out these links isn't a criticism, it's to show you how real artists steal from each other in non-hacky ways. And these riffs are all stealing from each other in the right way, using method 3, steal the notes, but change the rhythm. This is the one that, poorly used, leads to the most lawsuits, because if the notes don't change and other things are too similar, people get kind of litigious, like Stairway to Heaven versus Taurus by Spirit. I'm not gonna play the real tracks because I don't want YouTube to block my ass, but Stairway had very similar notes and rhythm and key and tempo and acoustic guitar arpeggios. Ultimately, Zepp got off the hook with that lawsuit. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. But if you really change the rhythm while stealing the notes, plus possibly combine this with methods later in the video, then you're deep in the safe zone, pulling inspiration from the notes that you love hearing while making them feel totally different. Check this out. The Zepp riff has the most complex notes of the 3. But the core anchor notes are just A, G, F sharp, F, E. So the Chicago riff lifted those same notes, but with a slightly different rhythm. And then Green Day took those same notes, moved them all down a half step by tuning down their guitars, and stripped the rhythm down even more. All to create the masterpiece mashup, Babe, I'm Gonna Eat Brain Stew at 25. And when this steal the notes method is used on super simple note combinations, it's pretty invisible. Like take roots and fifths, the bread and butter of bass playing in all styles of music. We've all played those notes with different rhythms, different permutations. You can't really track who stole what from who. Like Sitting on the Dock of the Bay versus I Just Called to Say I Love You versus Have You Ever Seen the Rain? They're all so basic, you can't really say, oh, this is stolen from that. But you can also take a more distinctive set of notes, like let's grab Iron Man. I'll play the same notes, same order, but with a new rhythm, which gives a totally different riff. And these are just launching off points. If you have more ideas once you start, go for it. You might end up with only 5% stolen material, and that's great. And there's actually a way to steal notes and rhythms without being a hack, and the trick is in this next method. These riffs sound similar, but in a different way, right? Kind of makes you scratch your head versus a super obvious copy. Because method 4 is to steal notes and even rhythms, but rearrange them, either by changing the order, the octave placement, or other slight tweaks. Now, as always, you gotta be tasteful when rearranging, because this bass line sounds a little bit too much like. The notes are very slightly rearranged, but like 75% of the rhythm got stolen, and it's in the same key, and it came out like 2 years later in the same genre. We'll talk about the genre thing later. later in the video. This is not meant as a diss to Rod Temperton, who wrote Thriller and tons of other great songs, like Off the Wall, Boogie Nights, Gimme the Night, Stomp. As Temperton's long-lost colleague Voltaire said, but in French, almost all is imitation. The most original wits borrow from one another. Ho ho ho. And we can't even help ourselves from stealing in bits and pieces. It's called influence. But it goes to show that stealing without these methods can be risky. On the songwriting side, you can piss people off and get sued, and on the bass playing side, you just don't get to exercise your creativity enough to grow if you're stealing too much. But if you really honestly rearrange the notes, this is a cool way to get something that sounds close to your original source while making it your own. And while there's no interview of Killers bassist Mark Stormer saying, "Oh yeah, I got that riff from Barbarism Begins at Home," we know the Killers are Smiths fans, they've covered Smiths songs, and have even toured with Morrissey. So Andy Rourke's riff on the Smiths' original track starts on a low root note and then ends with that distinctive bow bow bow, using the second and third notes of the minor scale, but up an octave. Stormer's riff also starts on a low root note, but that ending melodic bit got tweaked by rearranging that last root note up an octave, so instead of it's. Plus there's some borrowed Smiths vibe in the rhythm, but not 100%, and some other subtle note tweaks. And the Killers' steal is even more artful in the big picture, because in the remaining 3 bars of these riffs, they take different twists and turns and go to different chords. Elvis Costello would approve. It's how rock and roll works. You take the broken pieces of another thrill and make it a brand new toy. So using the rearrange method, you could take the rhythm and the notes of Uptown Funk and just change the note order, and you get an inspired by riff. But what if you could basically keep the note order and still make it not sound like a ripoff? See if you can spot the method used on this riff. Weirdly similar, right? But the Jane's Addiction line kept from being a carbon copy by using method 5, change the feel. This is mainly done by changing speed, but could also mean changes in the drum beat, bass tone, the key, just stuff that makes it feel different. A good example of what not to do with this method is the old Ghostbusters Huey Lewis debacle.
Something strange in your
It is slightly different, and Ray Parker Jr. probably could have gotten away with it if he'd made the overall feel different. But not only does the bass line have the same anchor notes in the same places, it also had the same bass tone and a similar drum beat to the Huey Lewis song I Want a New Drug. And also started with the same guitar slidey sound thing. Here's Huey Lewis, and here's Ghostbusters. It's like, come on. But Jane's Addiction bassist Eric Avery got this Wrathchild vibe lawsuit-free with a more honest use of the change the feel method. It works because whether things seem familiar or not is very context dependent. If you change the speed or the tone or the beat enough, something you would normally recognize immediately sounds like something else. So Avery's line has slightly different notes from Steve Harris's original, but it's still a very similar bass line on paper. Same key, same pounding on the low E, same driving plucking, but Mountain Song is more than 20 beats per minute slower with a totally different drum beat, so it takes the riff in a different feeling direction. Now, was Eric Avery intentionally pulling Mountain Song from Wrathchild? We don't really know. He doesn't talk that much about his early influences, so maybe, or it could have been subconscious, or it could have been a coincidence. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you can easily use these methods to make your favorites your own. And this change the feel method is super fun to use. Just take any riff you know and try it faster or slower, which will inspire a drummer to come up with a different beat to go with it. Like take the national anthem, Radiohead. We slow down the tempo and dub down the tone. Now it's reggae vibes. There's an even more subtle stealing method you can use, one so sneaky that I honestly can't believe I found such a good example of it. Can you even spot it? Okay, if you caught what's happening here, I'm impressed. Here's Le Freak again. Check out the guitar part. And here's the bass to Poison Arrow. Now, given that ABC had definitely heard Le Freak because it came out just 4 years earlier in the same genre ballpark, it's clear that sneaky bassist Mark Lickley was using Method 6, steal from other instruments. Now, this method won't always work. For bass lines, obviously you need something rhythmic, because like, will always love, it's a good melody, it's not much of a bass line. But if you rip the right thing, this is a pretty faultless method because you'll inherently make creative changes to fit the original part onto your bass. As Nobel laureate André Gide said, everything that needs to be said has already been said. But since no one was listening, everything must be said again. And I'm certain he was referring specifically to stealing Nile Rodgers' guitar parts. And you know who else liked Nile's guitar parts? Bernard Edwards, also of Chic, because the bass line later in the song is ripping the guitar part too. So you could say, well, isn't the ABC song ripping the bass line and isn't this all a farce? No, because this is distinctly in the style of Nile's signature rhythm guitar playing. So how can you use the change instruments method? Let's have fun with it. Let's grab the vocal melody from Sugar Lumps by Flight of the Conchords. Then let's take it down an octave, add some dirt, and it's an epic rock bass riff. All right, I saved this next method for last because it's a big one, everybody uses it, and it gets kind of wild.
I need love.
Okay, pretty obvious one. The rhythm is very similar, and Iggy Pop's drummer Hunt Sales even talks about that in this interview from the excellent YouTube channel Produced Like a Pro.
Dad, I took George of the Jungle, the cartoon thing. You Can't Hurry Love, the Supremes. Wrapped it all up and then made it my bag. At least I'm honest, I'll tell
But
you.
it goes even deeper. Take Lust for Life and add a little bit of this vibe, and you get... Then make that minor instead of major. Then rip off the Jam and Jet without really changing anything. So what's going on here? The time-honored Method 7, steal from different genres. Now, in my opinion, the Weezer example is not the most elegant steal. I love Weezer, but they're a rock band, and so is Jet, and so are the Jam. So they kind of just took something verbatim from the same genre. But when you copy from other genres, you transform what you started with, and it unavoidably becomes something original. Or at least new original. This has been used infinitely in the history of modern music. Metal came from copying rock, which came from copying blues. Jazz came from blues. Basically everything came from blues. But you know how I just said that metal came from copying rock, and you implicitly accepted it as gospel truth? Well, Geezer Butler, the all-father of metal, tells a different story.
I was a medium-sized fan of Holt's The Planet Suite, and one of the days we were rehearsing and I was going. And then the next day, Tony went in and went. And that's the way how Black Sabbath came about.
Every cool riff has already been written by Black Sabbath. You're either playing it slightly different or backwards or faster or slow, but they did everything already.
But in this case, it looks like Holst beat them to the punch, the original heavy metal Savage. This was a legendary level steal by Sabbath because they pulled it from another genre, Method 7, but also only stole half, Method 1, not the second half of the Mars riff, and rearranged the notes and rhythm, Method 4, so this instead of this. And to do your own legendary steals, you can mix and match all these methods to get infinite original ideas out of just one starting bass line. Let's use Peace Sells by Megadeth because I never get tired of it. Here's the original. And here's Method 1, steal the first half. All right, Method 2, let's steal the rhythm, change the notes, totally different vibe. Method 3 will steal the notes but change the rhythm, even more different. And Method 4, same notes, same rhythm, but I'll just change the order. And you can go even crazier. Let's combine Methods 5 and 7, change the feel and the genre, and I present to you Peace Sells, the Sexy Funk Jam. These methods all work even if you don't have much music knowledge. But if you're stealing stuff and you need to tweak the notes or maybe change them entirely, it makes it way easier if you understand the basics of scales, which can be confusing unless you watch this really good video that I'm now gesticulating wildly at that'll get you scale competent in 5 simple steps. Just 5 steps, just 5 simple steps. I wrote this song. Original.